Welcome to Integrative Medicine with Dr. Leland Stillman, the podcast where we explore the best of East and West, old and new, conventional and unconventional, in search of answers to medicine's toughest cases and most difficult problems. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Diagnostics and therapeutics discussed on this podcast may or may not be right for you. So talk to a qualified practitioner before taking action based on what you learn here. If you'd like to become a patient at my practice, go to stillmanmd.com to schedule a complimentary discovery call. Thank you for listening and welcome to today's episode. Hello everyone, Dr. Stillman back again for another episode. Today I am very excited to be interviewing Dr. Carlos A. Loredo Ritter. He graduated as a medical doctor from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, completed his pediatrics residency and subspecialty in pediatric neurology at the National Institute of Pediatrics. When he discovered man-made electromagnetic waves interfering with brain activity through EEGs and polysomnograms, he went on to study sleep medicine and physics through Yale and Stanford's universities' online programs, and over 19 years of research, he has written protocols for EMF home diagnosis and shielding. And we met because you inspected and shielded, I don't know if you shielded it, but you inspected a patient's house and they were very impressed by you and they said you did a great job. And I said, great. I love talking to people about EMF, and I particularly wanted to talk to somebody not about just the science, which is very important, but the results. Like, how does this really impact people? How big of a deal is this actually? So I like to start by asking everyone who they are and where they're from.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. So I was born in Mexico City, right in the middle of the city. So that's where I grew up. I lived there for 40 years, and that's where I actually did pretty much all my life. Of course, I traveled, right? But pretty much all my life was there. So I did get the idea to become a medical doctor. I applied.
What was it that gave you the idea?
Well, it's kind of cheating a little bit and not. So I have one uncle that is a pediatrician, and he's a pediatrician that actually we're in this area where specialties and subspecialties are not that old on time.
Mm-hmm.
So he was one of the first ones, the very first one, but one of the first ones to become a pediatric medicine internist. And it was fascinating to know, oh my goodness, a pediatrician that has a subspecialty. So that actually has a lot of things to do with whatever I was trying to pursue. Of course, my admiration for some members of my family played a role as well. And at the same time, I come from a family. There is pretty much everybody's a lawyer in different areas. So there's only two guys that are not lawyers, me and my uncle. We're both are medical doctors. And we both, well, of course, I was following the admiration of him, and I become a pediatrician as well. I have this passion for kids. And I think that I always was destined to be a pediatrician.
I love it. And so you went to medical school, and then tell us the story of how you became interested in EMF, which is certainly not something that the average pediatric neurologist is interested in.
Exactly. When I graduated as a pediatrician, I follow everything that the medical field offers, right? But I did have the opportunity to study pediatric neurologists. In my opinion, neurology patients in pediatrics, they were the most vulnerable, the ones that they need the most protection. So I decided, you know what, this is my passion. So when I did the transition between pediatrics and pediatric neurology, I discovered that there's so many things that I didn't know. So many things that I thought that they were one way, when in reality, the brain is so complex that it got me grounded. I really don't know that many things. Well, I kind of transition a little bit because the brain is, I didn't know this, and it's sad that we don't think in these terms. The brain is pretty much electrical and then biochemical, but those two things are hand to hand. But the beginning is electrical. So, of course, as a pediatrician, as a pediatric neurologist, you have to see a lot of electroencephalograms. Electrograms are a study where you put a lot of electrodes here and so many. And whatever you try to visualize is how the neurons communicate with themselves electrically. And Of course, there are some parameters that tells you, oh, this is kind of like whatever we expect from a normal patient. This is what we expect from etc. All different diseases. Turns out that when I was practicing now in my private practice, and I was in charge of that area, I kind of was the guy that doesn't read the reports from the neurophysiologist, which is the specialist that actually tells you, hey, this means, etc. They read the study and they tell you, they kind of help. Well, I mean, I was taught in my years of resident, don't believe, but just confirm. You're the doctor, you see the patient, you explore, so watch the study, the whole study, the whole test. So I did. And it turns out that at that time is when wireless devices started booming in this world. It's like, I'm, I'm not that young. I'm 53 years old right now. I was a medical doctor in between the division before wireless devices and after wireless device. So it turns out that it was the beginnings of that. A lot of my patients, for some reason, I kind of have epileptic patients and autistic patients, the beginnings at that time. And of course, you have to ask parents a lot of questions because parents knows everything. If you know how to ask those questions, they will tell you what's the diagnosis. So a lot of parents, they were saying the same thing. My kid gets worse when they play video games, the new ones that are wireless. I think that I had to hear that over and over and over until one day I said, I know what you're going to tell me. So by watching reviewing the test, one day I start seeing things that I never seen before. Pay attention not to the gross things, but to the things that everybody just leave out because they're complex. And whatever I see in there is some waves that didn't belong to the brain. I didn't know this at that time, but it became a little bit more evident. Of course, there's not that many pediatric neurologists in the world. I mean, we're a lot now, but there's not that many. So talking to other doctors and asking, hey, what is this thing that I'm seeing? Well, it turns out that nobody knew. Absolutely. And time passed, and I was kind of puzzled about that. Not just because of me. I did have in that time a very amazing neurophysiologist, and she's actually the one that without even knowing, she got me into this area. She kind of pointed out a few things in there in the EEG, and years after, my curiosity was there, and I read some articles, not in the neurology area, neurophysiology area, but in something new that it was kind of foreign for us, biophysics area. It turns out that they were describing exactly what I was seeing. Fascinating because now I have the answer of something that I don't know, don't understand, etc. And I got that right. It turns out that if you look closely to all the other patients before, now that you know something that you didn't know before, you start to see how prevalent that was. And that is why I become a guy in this area. I'm going to say, one of the main symptoms of EMFs is disruption on the sleep. That is why I decide after, you know what, I need to study a little bit more, and I study sleep medicine, not as a specialty, not the specialty that we have, like you put a CPAP, no, as biochemical pathways of restoration that are activated during the time of sleep. I'm going to say something that it's going to sound weird. It's not weird, but we as humans, we cannot be awake and asleep at the same time because the cell is doing completely different things. Right now, we're awake and our biochemical pathways are in function for whatever we're doing. But whenever we go to sleep, then they activate some functions to restore, to diagnose. Hey, each cell is kind of like a microcosmos, and each cell wears out, and each cell knows what is the damage that I have. This cell is going to be damaged in a different way than the other one, and the other one, etc. So each one has to diagnose itself. What is my damage? So that's what I study sleep medicine in that time, which at the end of the day, it got me to, I need to study more because it turns out that these EMFs, it is ruled by the laws of physics, and I'm a biologist. I have no idea what is Q1 times Q2 over 4 pi epsilon 0. So I had to study that. So that is
You got
how I
really
got
deep into
this.
the physics, huh?
Well, physics at the end of the day is what it rules EMFs.
I know.
And yeah.
But not just EMF. I mean, physics is really the rules of the universe. And that's why I find,
Exactly.
and I'm really curious. So you got into this, you're very curious, obviously. And when you confronted other doctors over the years with your findings, how did they respond?
At the beginning, they respond like, "Are you crazy?" That's what they told me. My friends and people that know me, I have to say that I did have a very successful practice. And it was puzzling for everybody to see me leaving the practice by itself when you leave the practice when things don't go right.
Right.
Well, I think so. But no, I left my practice when things were actually amazing for me. Amazing for me under the economic point of view, prestige
Yes.
point of view, etc. But not necessarily inside of me. I was missing something. I'm gonna say something, and I hope that nobody gets offended for this. But I kind of cry whenever I realize that I was a medical doctor. I thought of myself like an intelligent man, and I realized that the only tool that I have is prescribing. Prescribing something that somebody else invented and put in the shelves. So there's got to be something more in medicine than that, especially because we have to go to the sources of a problem if you want to change something. In this case, because EMS was the source of a problem, I had to tackle that source. So at the beginning, they said, "You're crazy." Before, I've been doing this for 19 years now. I told my kids, my wife at that time, I told them, "Hey, I'm going to take 6 months. Please don't talk to me for 6 months because I need to study this." Those 6 months become 19 years.
Wow.
And
So
in
tell
the
us the
middle,
story. What was the journey?
it was fascinating and painful at the same time.
I know all
Um,
about that.
Let me tell you how I got into the States. I got invited to the States um, to lead a team that because nobody knew about EMFs, nobody knew about sleep medicine. In the relation, my
Yeah.
job, it was going to be to lead a team to find what is the relation between sleeping disorders and EMFs.
Who put this together?
I don't know exactly who was that person. It was a philanthropist that put a lot of money in there.
Really? Did they earmark it for EMF?
I don't know exactly the whole story behind because I was brought already through a program.
Were you aware at the time that people like Robert Becker got their funding pulled when they started to look into EMF?
I didn't know him at all. It
Yeah.
was a different source that brought me here. Well, unfortunately, the sponsor died and
Mm.
we got defunded. That is why it's been longer, probably, whatever I've been doing this. I had to fund now my own, by myself, my own research, which has been taking so long. So when you
Yeah.
ask, how was the journey? It was amazing. And sometimes it was extremely painful in other times because, yeah, when you don't have good funding, it's a huge problem.
Life's tough when you don't have the funds to do what you're passionate about. I have to share this is one of my favorite quotes. So, do you know who Albert Szent-Györgyi was? He won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of vitamin C.
Okay.
And he said, "The real scientist is ready to bear any privation and, if need be, starvation, rather than let anyone dictate to him which direction his work must take."
Well, I did starve sometimes. Not really, but you know what? Yeah, I mean, it's been a path where my family and I did suffer a little bit. It wasn't all roses all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I did question, what am I doing? Like,
Yeah,
seriously. And,
absolutely.
but you know what? Eventually, little things are is shining the light in there, and it keeps you going. It kept you going. Yeah, sometimes I've tried to quit and knowing I didn't find whatever I was looking for. I didn't know what I was looking for, to be honest. I didn't know. what direction. I just got the direction of the papers that I was reading, the things that I was
Yes.
learning, and correlating. Thank God I did see patients clinically. And of course, I have the data from that. I remember when you start correlating things and start making sense, like why these things happen,
Yes. I
it's
know.
exciting. So
I know
that's what
exactly
it
what you
kept me
mean.
going.
And you
Yeah.
feel like well, I don't know about you, but I have felt in my career like I would think what I'm doing is nuts. I should just have a regular job. But there is this compulsion of this is such an interesting problem and all I want to do is study it and solve it. And I don't know what that looks like, but I know I have to gather more data and I have to get more data and more data and more
Yeah.
data. And let's just say it's not necessarily, if I look at it from the perspective of how I run the practice now, let's just say we have a very large research and development budget because I just can't stop. I mean, I would rather spend money on lab testing to try and crack open a difficult case than
Okay.
have a nice 3-course meal out with my wife. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't admit that, but I think she knows.
Not online.
I think she knows. She knows I'm obsessed, and she knew she was signing up for that. But it really, I don't know what it is. It is there is definitely a piece of me that is like, Leland, you are totally irrational. Why don't you just take some wins and enjoy life a little more? But it's, I don't know about you. I just had a case. I was just on a call with them, and she's now 70% better. And I've been working on that case for like 2 years, and finally I got her feeling better, and it felt so good. And I don't know. It's like a feeling that I just want to chase all day.
Yeah. Look, here in neurology, it's kind of discouraging again sometimes because you don't have those big aha moments that, oh my God, it's kind of like a surgeon. You take a tumor, there's no tumor.
I got to tell you a joke. So I was in the wards at UVA where I did my training in medical school, and there was a joke that we heard. A medical student is shadowing the neurologist in this, like the stroke ward, and they're rounding on patients and seeing them and talking about the cases. And the medical student says to the attending, the physician in charge, for those of you who don't know what attending is, that's what that means. He says, well, what are we going to do for all these people? They're horribly debilitated, and isn't there more we can do than just basically give them aspirin and like a pat on the back? And he says, look, kid, if you wanted to save lives, you should have become a fireman.
Sometimes I feel like that. Yeah.
Well, I will say, because of course, and I don't know if you know this, but we have a kid who, our son, Benjamin, had a really severe birth injury. So there is more that we can do than just pat on the back, some aspirin. But you're right. I mean, the brain takes so long to remodel and to heal.
But now, I'm sorry to interrupt, but now I do have good news.
Yes.
So through this research, we as humans, and I hope that I can make it clear at this point, the human body is an amazing body. And the word homeostasis actually means a lot now for me in these times, because we live in this toxic world and we have so many toxins. Actually, I'm going to say it like this. It's really difficult for a human body to be chronically ill, to develop a chronic illness, because we do have biochemical pathways and electrical pathways, kind of like backups to backups to backups to prevent this raid in the human cell. That's why we sleep. Sleep is, in the past, we thought, oh, sleep is wasting time. We should be working instead of sleeping. No.
Oof.
Now I'm going to say to those ones who says that, please understand that you cannot be productive if you don't sleep, if you don't restore. So the most important
not to mention
time
the fact
of the day,
we say, we put it like this: if you're not sleeping enough, you're stealing time from your future. Exactly. You're not going to win.
I agree.
You're going to lose. You're going to live a shorter life, and you're going to get more done faster. So long as you're comfortable with that trade-off, okay. But nobody can in good conscience recommend that.
Yeah. So right now, sleeping encloses that superpower that we humans have, and is healing. If I have some injury in my cells, and I'm going to talk about DNA damage, it can be resynthesized and it can be replaced. That example goes to everything. If I have one enzyme that is damaged, we should go to sleep. Sleep is extremely complex because something that is broken in there, it has to be totally destroyed and resynthesized later. That's why we have so many different stages of sleep. It doesn't happen this way, but it's just for teaching purposes. Stage 1, it's kind of like a diagnosis of the cell. The brain telling every cell, hey, I need you guys to stop working in the awake position. And then I need you guys to start diagnosing what is your damage. And then we go to stage number 2, where it's not necessarily whatever I'm saying, but it's the example is, okay, I need to tag all the enzymes, all the parts that you have broken, so we can shred them, so we can just destroy them. Once that we know what we destroyed, we're going to resynthesize again, stage 3. So it's not exactly like that, but kind of. If we don't sleep properly, then those stages are not going to be completed. So we're going to wake up with broken pieces still.
Mm-hmm.
And during that day, we're going to break more. And then we're going to go to sleep and we're not going to restore properly. So it's a cumulative effect. It's a matter of time when a chronic illness is just going to show the symptom. It turns out that EMFs is one of the first culprits to create sleeping disorders. Then let me tell you one thing. I was having a discussion with one of a group of neurologists, and sadly, it didn't go that well because I'm going to say, once that you have a vision in your program for one thing and somebody come and tell you it's not exactly like that, well, some take it well, some doesn't take it well. And I haven't published a lot, so until I publish is whenever they're going to listen more. But the thing is that what I was saying is we got in a controversy and they said, whatever you're saying is nonsense. I said, how many of your patients have you checked for exposure to EMFs? And they said, none. None of them wrong question. None of them are exposed. My next question was, how many have you tested for that? Because just because you don't test it, it doesn't mean that they're not exposed. And let me tell you, I do have now a lot of subjects that I test. And yeah, EMFs is a thing of this century. EMFs is something that pretty much everybody is exposed in different levels, right? In different proportions. We have to be aware of 5 different types of EMFs. And it turns out that these 5, well, each one of these ones probably is attached to some or other symptomatology or damage in different organs. I mean, it gets more complex than that because actually your background matters a lot. And I'm going to say this, if you allow me this 2 minutes. I was born a long time ago, and my background is my background. If I was exposed at that time to toxins that damage me, it's still there. It's not that it's physically in there, but the damage is still there. Over the years, it's a cumulative effect. So let's say right now I live in this house with my wife, etc. We have different backgrounds. What if I was exposed living in the house under power lines and she wasn't for so many years? I'm going to develop some things different than her, even if right now we share the same exposure. I don't have exposure because I shield my house.
Yeah, of course. But I
And
want to make sure I understand you. So you mean that historical exposures, because I think most people who are even interested in EMF at all think that when they end the exposure, they end the effect. But you're saying that our physiology, and would you say our nervous systems are basically permanently imprinted to some extent by the electromagnetic radiation that we're exposed to?
kind of like that. But the thing is it's extremely difficult to stop the exposure. Let's talk about this. Protocols to diagnose what is your real exposure, Let me tell you one protocol that I wrote, and that's the one that I actually use every time that I go and measure houses. I use 8 different professional meters. The reason why I use 8 professional meters is because the world only have 8 professional meters and that are available for you to travel with. Even my meters are professional, and I have so many of them. Meters get tricked by EMFs. EMFs are so many now. We live in a soup of EMFs. Unfortunately, EMFs are invisible, so you cannot see that soup. If you close your eyes and try to imagine how many waves would be in this area from all different sources, it turns out that they trick the meters. Because the meter works, try to get a baseline, but the baseline right now is not without EMFs, without electric fields. because we live in a world that has
Right.
so many electric fields. So the baseline
Yeah, I
is
see
already
what a
wrong.
big problem this is. Yeah.
And then it's going to try to see what is the difference between the baseline and whatever I'm reading here. So we start with a disadvantage already. I measure every house, every room of the house twice. I measure with electricity in the house and then all the devices that they have, etc. And then I cut the power completely. Cut the power of the house and do exactly the same thing. With that, whatever I do have is a variable that is going to give me two different numbers. Well, I know that those numbers are not real. I have to determine what is the interference factor in this house. Interference factor means that waves collide with each other and they cancel. Imagine I have one wave from this side and another one from this side. Each one measures 10. Whenever this one reaches my meter, it's going to say 10 in there. But when this one reaches the meter at the same time that the other one, it's going to say 0, when in reality it's 20. So we have to run equations to understand what would be the reality of those waves in the house. If we don't do this, it is a science and it's an art now. But the thing is that if somebody just have a meter that they buy online, etc., not that money matters, but yeah, some of the meters that are professional, they cost 6,000 euros, and it tells you just one little tiny thing of whatever you need to know. Imagine that compared to a meter that costs $200. So the quality is going to be important. But that's not necessarily the whole thing.
So we could talk about the nitty-gritty of this all day, and I would love to, but I really want to hear from you the kind of results, the exceptional results you've seen in mitigating people's houses. And I specifically want to know, because what I found with clinicians is that when they get onto something, doesn't matter what it is, mold, hormones, Lyme disease, name a thing that we do for patients. When they get onto something that really works, there's usually one or two or a handful of cases where there's a result and they just think, oh my gosh, it's like this light bulb aha moment. I've really got something here. So I'd love to know, because you obviously took this from theory. Okay, I see this weird signal on this EEG. Okay, I see this correlation between playing video games and worse neurological symptoms. Okay, now I'm studying deep in physics at academic research institutions, doing cutting edge work. But when did it come alive to you in a case? Tell us the story.
So I'm going to tell a story long time ago at the very beginnings. And when I came here to the States, I actually proposed, hey, I'm a medical doctor in Mexico City, and I have a lot of structure in there. Why don't the money that you're going to give me here, let me bring it down there? And that's what I did at the beginning for a couple of years. One of the things that I did is I went to this rural psychiatrist facility where they have people, of course, pediatrics, right? I have this patient with severe spectrum. I'm going to put on the spectrum because, well, he was very dysfunctional in so many ways. He cannot speak. He was 8 years old, a male, 8 years old. He could not speak, and he was extremely violent. He cannot hold still. For the parents, the mom, in this case, she lived alone with him. It was now very difficult to manage. The way that I have this patient is, so I went to that hospital and I asked, hey, look, I'm this guy, I'm doing these protocols, blah, blah, blah. Could you please give me one of the patients that you cannot do anything anymore? The one that you already throw the towel and you don't want to do anything. They brought me 20 files. I asked for one and they brought me 20. So I picked this little kid, and whatever I did is I shield wherever he slept. It was a big effort about so many people. So
what was the exposure like in this rural facility? Were there radios or cell phones or what?
It's all together. It's from low frequencies, the wires in the walls.
But paint me like a picture. Was this, because I remember my first smartphone I got in 2010, was it? When I went to medical school? What year was this?
I'm going to say this is around like 2008, 2009.
So and this was in Mexico, and you said rural Mexico? So I'm guessing that people were not running around with Bluetooth headsets and...
Yeah, they didn't. Wires in the wall.
Okay.
Power lines outside of the house.
Yep.
And their electricity, which goes attached with that. And so whatever I did is I shield the space where he was sleeping.
Can you tell us
And
how?
yeah, and that time I used 2 layers. Something the very beginnings of a medical grade grounding system. We need two devices or 2 components to shield in general. We need something to capture EMFs because there's no such a thing as good waves and bad waves. No, we need to capture them. We need to capture EMFs. And then we need to send it to the ground. Send it to the ground is not as easy because you need an apparatus that absorbs EMFs. We are not talking about current. Current is something that you just put a pole in there, a rod, whatever metal, and current will go there. We are not talking about current. We're talking about fields. Imagine fields are diluted here in the environment. So people understand we talk about EMFs as volts per square meter or microvolts or microwatts or square meter. Whatever it is imagine a cube of air and the diluted electric particles that are in there. That's what we measure. So we need an apparatus that can capture those diluted electrical particles. So it's a medical grade grounding system. So in his case, I did a 2-layer. I put mesh, EMF mesh, which is based on aluminum, thick aluminum, but some other alloys around. And then the second layer, it has to be particles of, in that case, it was graphite and carbon. And we capture everything in the room and send it to the ground. 3 months later, the kid was behaving without anxiety. He wasn't aggressive anymore. He can sleep better. Therefore, he can follow orders now. He didn't speak yet, but whatever we were seeing is that there was some kid that is starting to be extremely dysfunctional that now is a kid that he can be back into therapy. I didn't follow that much that kid because at the beginning, whatever I wanted to see is if the shielding actually works. And then, of course, I have to move on in different things. I moved here to the States. It was really difficult for me to go back. I have different protocols at that time. But that was my first, oh my goodness, this thing is changing. Whatever I saw, and I'm going to say a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I did a study and I haven't published yet. But whatever I got is 87 houses shielded and a similar number of houses non-shielded. And I asked them, hey, can I do electroencephalograms prior to shielding and then every 3 months? And I'm going to do a polysomnogram before and I'm going to do a polysomnogram a year after.
That's a sleep study for those of you not hip with the lingo.
Yeah, sorry about that. That. So to do sleep studies and to do EEGs, I had to shield the sleep center in the EEG. I didn't do it in here in the States. So whatever I was measuring, it was homeostasis, electrical homeostasis of the brain. And I'm going to start with the first thing. I mean, there's so many parameters, right? But the first one is that whatever happens in one hemisphere, it has to happen exactly at the same time, the microsecond in the other one. So the brain has to communicate in synchrony. And it has to be symmetrical. It has to be with the same morphology, etc. So whatever I see at the beginning is that everybody was asynchronized. The brain was not communicating in harmony. After a year, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the in between because in between it wasn't that pretty for me. I thought that at the 3rd month, they were getting worse, my shielded patient. And I was very discouraged.
Really?
But it turns out that it seems like we kind of go through a detox. And in the brain, it was a little bit more chaotic. But at the end, well, not at the end of the study, because the study was going to be ending in 2 years. I actually didn't finish that because I'll explain later some things. But when we reached the mark of 1 year, most of the clients, the patients in the shielded area regain homeostasis, which is extremely encouraging because whatever I was saying is that we sleep to restore. If we allow the human body to restore, to do that job with no interference of toxins. In this case, it's going to be an electric pollutant that is surrounding you using the air as a conduit. When we put a shelter or a sanctuary area for you to sleep, over time, you're going to regain that ability to restore, which I was saying at the beginning is our superpower as humans, the healing power.
So I want to make sure I
And
understand you correctly. Over the year, the people who were in the shielded buildings or sleeping areas initially saw their sleep deteriorate in quality, but then improve. Did you correlate this with symptoms as they went through this process?
I didn't for a purpose. When you do a protocol, you cannot put so many variables in there. I left the symptomatology apart because if not, they would destroy me with my protocol. So no, I didn't include it.
Yeah.
This is for now, different protocols that I'm going to have. By the way, if the audience it wanted to interact, should have funding for these kind of things. It's very important, in my opinion. Funding is crucial because if not, we don't really know what's going on.
I know.
So at the end of the day, whatever I just measure is that homeostasis, electrical homeostasis. And I can tell you, yes, the symptoms change. How do I know? Because I didn't do it in pediatric patients. I did it in adult patients. They're not patients because I wasn't really,
I know.
I don't practice medicine that way anymore.
Yes.
At the beginning, when we met and they heard about the protocol, etc., they followed perfectly well whatever instructions I gave. At the end of the study, they didn't follow my instructions anymore. But I find out that they didn't follow because they felt better. Most of these people are EMF sensitive, yeah, right? And so those are the ones that actually I attract more, and those are the ones that are easy for me to talk to. So it turns out that they felt better even if they were exposed to something that they couldn't be exposed in the past. So when you feel better, you can dare more. And that's what happened. And well, that's extremely encouraging because it tells you that this logic of I sleep and I restore really is a thing. So, but the sleeping without toxins is the thing that we should have in mind all the time.
Dr. Ritter, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work?
I do have a website. It's called EMFhometesting.com.
Great. Thank you for joining me today. I'd love to have you back. We'll chat more about EMF.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. See you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.